what you believe is what you think God believes. And it's just utterly brilliant research. They manipulated your belief, and basically it was, if you changed your mind on a subject, lo and behold, God changed his mind as well.
Wow.
And it's just a fascinating study that shows that what we think God thinks or believes is a projection of our thoughts and beliefs.
That is a fun intro. Yeah.
Thanks. Okay, that took me, I kid you not, that took me like 5.5 hours.
So I was going to guess much more than that. Like, that's impressive work. Well done.
I think total, if I had to count like collecting all the clips and things like that, probably a lot more. But the actual putting everything together.
Yeah.
Very long time.
Yes,
very long
I
time.
believe that. Like, that was, I know what goes into that kind of thing. It's like, well done.
So you liked it? You felt honored by that? You feel like it's worth
me dancing?
Cool.
I was up here dancing. Love it.
I wanted to make sure that you felt like we're going hard for Dr. Bird. Like we're throwing it down. I love it. I bet you've never had a theme song like that, huh?
Nice. Oh, well, so, I mean, full disclosure, David McDonald made me a personal theme song,
and his are good, actually. His are top tier. So I
mean, for one of our streams, I actually sent him this song, and I said, "You need to play this the next time I'm on your show." And he's like, "Oh yeah,
done." Yeah. Well, listen, if I gotta be second to anybody, I'm glad it's David McDonald over at Deep Drinks. Everybody go check out after this, not during this.
Yeah.
David McDonald on Deep Drinks.
What's the longest you've gone without sleep? I love that you don't know.
I don't.
I respect that.
Listen,
you gotta think about that.
Listen, I have a past.
Yep, I can tell already.
Almost, I want to say almost 72 hours.
Ooh.
Could be 72, but I don't think so.
In my childhood, I grew up with a mother who, she was religious, then she wasn't. She was religious, then she wasn't. What we called backslidden, right? And then I'd go visit my dad, who was never religious. So I would be like 9, 10, 11 when I'd go visit for Christmas. And I'd be taken to drug parties. Like I grew up in the 70s. So I'd see the adults doing hash and smoking pot and drunk and so I was like, I thought everything. And I was never tempted to do anything. I never smoked. I never did drugs. I never drank. Nothing. I didn't even start drinking wine until I was like 37 or 38 years old.
Wow.
I just never had the desire. I never had the desire.
That's impressive.
But yeah, so my mom's walk with the Lord was so wishy-washy. I just never saw a real strong commitment with anyone.
Well, that's why you're an atheist.
Yeah.
You've never had. That's what people
never really knew God.
Sometimes it's just the way that they talk about the church up the street.
Literally.
Those guys and the way they're doing things. You don't want to be part of, and every other church except for ours is doing it wrong. And
yes.
Yeah.
I told Vince, you're almost better off being an atheist than being the wrong kind of evangelical Christian. You're almost more salvageable not believing in God at all than being a Presbyterian or a Methodist. Gary Parker, thank you so much for joining me on Growing Up Fundy. I'm so excited to have you. Yeah, I've been looking forward to getting you kind of on here on the record just to talk about yourself and your story for a very long time. For anybody who's listening, maybe this is your first time tuning in, maybe you've been here before. Gary and I are part of something called the Conversation Coalition, which is a group of 4 Christians and 4 atheists here in Nashville, Tennessee, that get together the last Thursday of every month, and we have conversations. And every month we pick a topic or a question, and one Christian member and one atheist member of our group gets on stage and has the conversation with a moderator that is usually another member of our group. And then we open the floor for Q&A, for live Q&A for people to attend. It's always free. We got snacks. We got all sorts of stuff. But I'm interested to learn more about Gary, because we get up there and we talk about these philosophical topics, but we don't really get to talk about each other much. And so enough from me. Tell us a little bit about yourself. Who are you? What do you do? What are you all about?
Yeah. Um, well, my name's Gary Parker. I was raised in Memphis. I was raised Southern Baptist, and I was fairly religious all of my young adult life. And we weren't. It wasn't like fundy. Um, we were in church every time the doors were open, but it wasn't. It wasn't in any way cultish or abusive or anything like that. My upbringing was very Beaver Cleaver, so to speak.
Yes.
And so I had a great upbringing. Been married about 25 years. We're coming up on our 25th anniversary this year.
Wow. Congratulations.
Yeah. Thank you.
That's awesome.
Most of that, we haven't attended a lot of, we've gone back and forth to a dozen different churches, pretty much all non-denominational, looking for our church home, so to speak. And about 5 years ago, I started having some cracks start forming in my faith, started asking a lot of questions. And then as I dug in, I kind of went down the Hitchens, Harris, Dawkins, YouTube rabbit holes.
Right. As you do.
And yeah, as one does. And from there started getting into a lot of conversations and asking a lot of questions and basically trying to find as much information as I could on different things. And finally, about 3 years ago, I would say everything came crumbling down, and I said, "Okay, I think I'm done with all this. I think human beings have made all this up." And
so, what was it about that point in the timeline that flipped the switch for you? Was it like an event, or did you meet somebody, or how does one just kind of decide decades into this that they have questions?
Yeah. So for my day-to-day work, I do granite countertops. So I'm really into rocks. Not that I'm a geologist or anything like that, but we do oftentimes find cool things in rocks, sometimes fossils, sometimes other things. So I remember a number of years ago, I was doing somebody's house, and I was walking them around looking at all this different granite and marble and different slabs for countertops. And I was showing them this one slab that has a bunch of fossils in it. It's pretty much an entire slab of fossils.
That's cool.
Yeah. In our industry, we just call it fossil stone because it's just got hundreds of them in these slabs of granite or slabs of, I guess it's a marble, you would say. Anyway, it's a Orthoceras is the fossil if you ever wanted to look it up. But, and I was telling them that when we cut this stuff, it behaves differently than other stones in the shop. We cut everything wet, and so it goes down into this slurry, kind of a sludge. And I've cut thousands and thousands of slabs, and so I'm very familiar with how that sludge normally, behaves. But when you cut this stuff, it's a little bit different because oil and water don't mix. And so these fossils are the overall slab is black. The reason it's black, and when you cut it, it smells like tar. It smells like somebody's asphalting outside.
Interesting.
So my theory has always been, these little guys, they're almost like giant earthworms, but earthworms that are like 3 or 4 feet long, and sometimes the size of your arm. And it's almost like you had a bowl of soup, froze it, a bowl of noodles, froze it, and then sliced. You would get little snippets of one and full big bodies of another one, and then little tails sticking out here and there. And, you get all these little bits and pieces because you've got this slice going through there. And so I'd say, and this stuff was tar pits years and years ago. And all these guys got into the tar pits with enough time and heat and pressure. And that now these are stone, like the petrified tree or, other things that become fossilized. So now we get slices of these, and when we cut them, you can smell the tar. You can,
that's cool.
Yeah. And so I was telling them about this, and I said, so millions of years ago, these guys swam into this area, and they looked at me and they went, millions. And I said,
oh, no.
Yeah, millions, and I didn't really think much about it, but that always stuck with me. And I thought, you guys really think that the earth is only a few thousand years old. Like you don't look at that as a myth or a fairy tale or just a way that people used to think about that. You guys really believe
Yeah.
that it's a young Earth. And
Yeah.
so that got me questioning. Another one of the cracks that started forming was I heard somebody say, well, got to stand with Israel, got to stand with Israel. And I thought, it just struck me as odd.
Yeah.
And so I started digging into it. Why is it that we have this strong bond to Israel? And
Yeah.
the more I learned about it, the more I learned it's a religious thing. It's
Yeah.
purely a religious motive, you know?
Yeah.
And so then I thought, well,
Especially Baptists. I've
especially
noticed, like, as a kid, like, we worshipped Israel. We loved Israel. And I remember as a kid thinking, so Jews are God's chosen people. We name our kids Jewish names. Why are we not all, like, why is the rule not to become Jewish?
right,
And
right,
nobody could ever answer that question for me. I was like, so he favors them the most, right? Yes, they're God's chosen people. Yes. Why aren't we trying for that? And as I got older, I learned more about Judaism, and that's kind of not how that works. Like, you can convert, but like it's a race and religion. There's all that. But I was never told any of that stuff. And so
yeah.
I was just walking around being like, if we all agree that God loves them the most, what why isn't rule number 1 be more like them? I'm confused.
Well, those are the things that I was raised and believed and
Interesting.
yeah, yeah. So young Earth and everything else. So once all those things, and I think just learning more about rocks and things like that just caused me to become curious. So I started
Yeah.
asking around a lot, and
And did
so
that impact at home? Because, obviously, I'm guessing you guys got married in the Baptist church as well.
oh yeah,
And so
well, we actually eloped. Um,
nice.
yeah, we got married one day on our lunch break. That morning,
We did too, like a week ago.
really,
Yeah.
that's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, we woke up that morning not knowing we were going to get married, and then by lunchtime, hey, let's go do this right now, and we did. We worked together, so
Nice.
yeah. Um, so as far as how it was at home, that was a challenge. First person I spoke to when I started really having doubts and started really feeling like, okay, I'm on a different trajectory now. First person I started having conversations with was my wife,
Yeah.
and it didn't go well. Um, she got
Interesting.
she got a little bit teary eyed and
Yeah.
left the conversation.
Yeah.
It did not feel good or pleasant in any way.
Right.
Um, Not that she's ever been tremendously religious or spiritual. If
Right.
I took the lead on that when we were heavily involved in church at times,
Right. Right.
but so I circled back around and a couple days later, and I said, "Hey, um, you seemed upset during that conversation." And she said, "Well, I felt very attacked, and I don't want to do that." And of course, I said, "Hey, we don't ever have to have this conversation again
Yeah.
at all. I love you more than anything else out here, so we never have to talk about it again. My goal is not to was not to attack you and your beliefs. My goal
Right.
was to open a window into myself and let you know what was
Right.
going on with me. And if I seemed lost in thought or busy researching something for a long period, I wanted you to know what's going on with me and what trajectory I'm on. And so that was my only intent in that, was to, like I said, shed some light. Uh, my next conversation was with my sister, and it went almost identical to my conversation that I had with my wife.
Yeah, because it's like it's such a definitive thing for religious people, even people who don't think they're that religious, like they're not even, fundies or evangelicals, for their relative to say, "Hey, I'm like questioning God. I'm questioning the Bible." It's like, whoa, whoa, whoa. What do you mean you're questioning? Like, the
Yeah,
whole thing is faith. Like, the whole brand is faith, and you don't have it. What have I done wrong? Or what
right.
can I do to save you? Is this God challenging me?
Yeah. And I wasn't at the time. I didn't tiptoe at all, or I didn't know to. These are people that I'm close to. We've known each other
Yeah.
our whole lives, or like quarter of a century,
Yeah.
and so we just communicate wide open. And I said, hey, this thing that we've been devoting our life to, I think it's all made up. And that didn't go very well.
This
And
thing
so,
that is like part of what the foundation of our relationship is built upon, not sure about it.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And then we based our identities and not to mention all this time we've spent and money and all that.
Yes.
Yeah. So that conversation went about the same, and I had to circle back. So my sister is in a different city, obviously. We're in Nashville, she's in Knoxville. And we normally speak once or twice a week, normally, I would say. We didn't speak for a couple of months. And
Wow.
yeah, so I had to
That's
circle back and
tough.
I said, hey, I feel disconnected here. What's going on? She said, well, in the last conversation we had, I felt attacked. And so I had to do the same thing and say, hey, I love you more than any of this stuff.
Yeah.
We never have to talk about it again. I just wanted to open a window. So we managed to get past that. Still did not speak about it. We carried on with our relationship and we would just talk about everything else under the sun,
Yeah.
but never broached this subject.
Right.
Care for each other a lot, spend time together, holidays, camping trips, various things, but just politely did not bring this up to one another.
And it's you and your sister, or you and your wife, or
Yeah,
both? Yeah.
me and my sister, yeah.
Yeah.
And then finally, about a year ago, so we've carried on like that for 2 years or so.
Wow.
Finally, about a year ago, maybe not even that long, maybe 8 or 9 months ago, I think it was in preparation for one of our Conversation Coalition events. I wanted to get her opinion on something. And so I said, I want to get your opinion. I will not offer mine. I simply want to take in I want to take in the information. I don't want to take in your opinion, but I'm not interested in giving mine unless you want it. I'm happy to, but
Right.
I
Right.
don't want you to think that I'm expecting a back and forth. I
Right.
just want to. She said, okay. And so I asked her the question. It was on morality or something. And she gave me her answer when she spoke for about 5-10 minutes. And I said, okay, thank you. I appreciate it. And then that was it. We moved on to something else. Well, then she circled back a couple of days later and said, hey, I gave you my opinion. I'm curious about yours. And I said, okay. And that began a back and forth. So
Interesting.
now we have back and forth,
Yeah.
occasionally, but we can at least talk about it now and know that neither one of us is being attacked.
Right.
And so that's been big.
Interesting.
Yeah. So yeah,
How
there's been some challenging conversations.
And so is your wife more like, do you guys have these conversations more often? Do you kind of leave him at the door? How does that go?
Yeah. It's at first it was a very slow process. Um, we would occasionally have conversations about it.
Mm.
Then she would research some apart from me,
Yeah.
and we would end up talking about some stuff later. Now we just have an open conversation about it whenever we see something or
Right.
anything like that.
Right.
And sometimes she brings it up. In the past year or so, and I don't know what caused it, but in the past year or so, we've started a new habit, which is in the morning we spend about 45 minutes together, just one on one, and
That's cool.
we intentionally try to find deep water to go in,
Yeah.
and
That's
so
cool.
whatever big topics are going on in the day, say it's the trans discussion or the Roe versus Wade, anything that's big
Yeah.
in the news like that, we'll intentionally say, hey, what's your opinion on this? Why do people think that way? How would I feel if I was in this situation? Do you think it's right for, and so we just intentionally have about 45 minutes every morning. And
That's
um,
cool.
yeah, yeah.
That's really
And,
cool.
and I've enjoyed it so much. I mean, I really look forward to them. So,
Yeah.
yeah, because
That's awesome.
the rest of the day, I'm just doing my thing and
Yeah.
installing Granite, and I'm on job sites, and so I don't, and I've been doing it for a long, long time. So it's not like I'm regularly challenged throughout my
Right.
day, and so I
Right.
look for this intellectual stimulation just to start my morning off, and
Yeah.
give something to rattle around in there. And
Yeah.
sometimes I'll be not able to find my footing on a certain topic, or just not really able to put it into words, and she will sum it up and make it. And I'm like, that's exactly what I was thinking, but I
That's what
couldn't.
I was gonna say.
Yeah. So it's been awesome. So
that's great. That's great.
Yeah.
And how? At what point did you decide that you're like, I'm gonna use the A word? I think that I don't believe in God. Are you atheist, agnostic? How do you consider yourself? If you had to put a label on it.
Definitely atheist,
Mm.
and I border on anti-theist.
Interesting.
Yeah, I really have.
Oh.
I have a bit of a, I don't want to be the angry atheist kind of thing,
Right.
but I won't go so far as to say I just passively am not convinced.
Right.
I'm not just sitting here waiting to be convinced or anything. I actively think that it's all made up. I have an opposition.
Interesting.
Oh yeah, I have an opposition to it. It's amazing to me that we haven't grown up out of this yet. And so
Yes.
I see real problems with it, and I think it does, not always. It can do real harm.
It can.
So I told you I've been married 25 years.
Right.
That was not my first marriage. It was my second. My first was a few years before that. It didn't last long, about a year and a half or so.
Oh no.
Yeah. But the reason why that first one happened was because of religious pressure.
I bet.
I was living with my girlfriend at the time. Yeah.
How I'm honestly shocked you had a relationship with God after that. You heathen.
Right. Living in sin, And so I was doing that, and I went to see my folks for some reason, and
for some reason.
I feel like I was thinking about this earlier. I was like, did I need some? I was 20, 21, like, did I need something? Like, I need help with some rent, or I forget, anyway, I was over visiting with my parents.
Right.
And started getting the whole, God knows that you're living in sin. And, and then when I would go to church occasionally, because I had gone to the same church my whole life. And so a lot of the rest of the community, they watched me grow up. And so I had these older ladies in the church that would kind of do the finger wagging thing. And, you got to buy the cow. You can't just get the milk for free, Gary.
God, I hate that. Oh my God. That phrase makes me nuts.
I know. I'm like, why are you comparing her to a cow, first of all?
Yeah. First of all, not a cow. Second of all, that's none of your business. That is inappropriate.
Yeah. But they had no problem, the finger waving and all that kind of stuff. And then so I'm a pretty thoughtful guy. And so when I thought, man, the creator of the universe, the one that's in control of all this, is pissed at me for and so I actually went back to our apartment that night to break up with my girlfriend. Yeah. And say, hey, of course she's brokenhearted. I mean, crying. I mean, what's going on? And I'm like, look, the thing is, we can't continue to do this. We can't live this way, so we either gotta end it or get married. And she's like, well, then why did you choose end it? And I'm like,
that is a good question. That is a good question.
I'm like, you would marry me? And she's like, yes, I'd marry you. I'm like, well, I guess we're getting married then. Yeah.
You're like, well, that's another red flag, ma'am. So
yeah,
if you're willing to marry me, that's another big old red flag for me.
Yeah. So anyway, through all this pressure and all that, next thing you know, I'm planning a wedding, and we did.
How long had you guys dated at that point?
I want to say about a year, maybe 6 months to a year, something like that. We moved in together fairly quickly, within a few months of knowing each other. But But yeah, so we'd been dating 6 months or a year, maybe. And then we're planning a wedding. So
Wow, that's a lot.
yeah, we hadn't really been through any seasons yet.
Right.
You know,
Right.
I think it's important to go through some of those. How do they handle the loss of a family member? How do they
Right.
handle holidays? How do
Right.
they, you got to get to know somebody first,
The
when
holidays, man, that can tank a relationship if you're not careful.
right. I mean, so, but yeah, we didn't do any of that. So we began to experience all these things as married, and yeah, so it didn't last at
Yeah.
all. And so finally I had to end that, and did, but I felt very pressured, and I feel like other people can be pressured into situations like that,
Yes, all the
be it
time.
be it getting
All the time.
married, where they
Mhm.
choose to go to school, what they
Mhm.
choose to do with their lives, whether or not they choose to
Yep.
chase, their dreams and passions, and do things.
Yep.
It, these things can have a tremendous effect on people's lives, and
Totally.
and a lot of those can be emotionally traumatizing
Yes.
and damaging.
Yes.
So there's times when it's fine, and I'm getting softer the more I go through my deconstruction, and the more I go through
Totally.
different phases of it. I heard you speak about this one time, and
Yes.
I really it struck me. But I do believe there's real harm that can be done. At the same time, I understand that it gives some people a sense of community, and there's a network of friends around. And when you leave all that, you don't have that. So you almost have to intentionally go build that in
Right.
other areas,
Right.
be it hobbies or secular groups or
Well, and like the main difference, because I've heard that too. People say, well, it's a social group. It's just like any other social group. And I'm like, yeah, but when I told my mom I wanted to quit piano, the response was not, is that how you're going to live your life? Do you know how upset your grandma's going to be that
right,
you've turned your back on piano? Do you understand what this is going to do to the family? Are you saying that you have nothing in common with this family anymore? It's not the same, right? It's
right,
not the same at all. It's not just a social group. It's an identity. It is a group, but the extradition from that group once you no longer identify with them is a lot different. I still hang out with people I was on the debate team with, even though none of us are on debate anymore. I
right.
am not hanging out with anyone I ever went to any church with or was involved in any religious activity with ever.
Yeah,
Like, it
yeah.
doesn't happen.
It doesn't, and I feel like there's a part of me that's sad about that.
Totally.
Because it
Totally.
is a sense of community, and a lot of times it's good people, and
Yeah,
I don't mind the challenge of exploring these ideas.
absolutely.
So that's the reason why I love spending time with my sister, even though we have
Yeah.
opposing views. I love that. I'm starting a podcast with a believer,
Hmm.
and um, uh, I'm really enjoying spending time with him.
Yeah.
Um, you and I have a mutual friend, Pedro, and so me and Pedro get together very regularly
Yeah.
and spend hours and hours, spend the whole afternoon together, specifically going through these types of things, and I love it. It's a
Right.
shame. It's a shame that that there is such a separation.
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
and I remember it from when I was growing up. I mean, everybody else was the others. If
Yes.
my mom saw me get off the school bus, and the guy that got off the school bus with me and was walking down the street with me had on, say, a leather jacket, oh, he's got to be one of those heavy metal guys. You're not going to hang
Yes.
out with him, because you might
Right.
hear some Ozzy Osbourne or some Iron Maiden or something, and so you can't hang out with that guy. And I
It
mean,
only takes once.
I
It only
know.
takes once.
Oh yeah, but any kind of difference like that, we don't associate with them, and
Right.
so it becomes a closed group,
Right.
and that I don't like that, and
Right. Well, not only that, but I think it can be toxic even for the people who are happy in it. And what I mean is, whenever I first tell people about like the angry atheist phase, right? I tell them, in order to become an atheist, you really just have to go through that angry phase. You're angry at yourself and the time you wasted. You're angry that you feel like you were vulnerable and tricked. You're angry at everybody who told you stuff. You're angry at people who invented the stuff. You're angry at everybody. But
yeah,
once you go through that phase and you start to recognize, like, okay, it was not the Truman Show. Everybody was not sitting back being like, we're going to keep Gary in this, we're going to lie to Gary his whole life. They are also being told the exact same thing that you were. They think they're doing the best for you by getting you involved. But when people are still in it, and I might argue it's worse when they're still enjoying it and when they're still in love with it and when they're still heavily involved with it, that's when I think it's its most toxic, because they genuinely believe everything it is that they're doing and they're saying and they're feeling, and they genuinely believe that the right thing to do is to cut off their relationship with you and people like you, because they truly think that surrounding themselves with people like us will stray their walk from God. And my thought process is, if you really believed, nobody would be able to take your walk with God away from you by
Right.
saying that hanging out with people like atheists and agnostic people and punk metal people, by saying that that can harm your walk with the Lord. What you're saying is, you might hear something that makes a lot of sense and doesn't align with everything you've been told, and you would rather go, la, 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 I can't hear you, than hear what the opposition is saying. Decide how you feel about that. What's your response to that? Prepare yourself for the real world where you're going to be hearing that all the time, and come to your own conclusion. True belief is not never being exposed to other thoughts and feelings and opinions. True belief is being exposed to everything, and then at the end of the day being like, but you know what? I'm a Christian. I'm a Catholic. I'm whatever. I'm a member of Islam. Like, that's who I am through and through. I've heard it, I've seen it, I've watched it, I've listened to it, I've befriended it, and at the end of the day, that's who I am. But
Right.
I think maybe deep down, people know that if they hear stuff that doesn't make a lot of sense, that's going to open a Pandora's box, and they would rather just get rid of the person who has the key to that box than peek inside and maybe prepare themselves for what they might hear or see.
Yeah. I mean, I remember feeling like I was doing something wrong by reading anything that contradicted
Yeah.
um, our worldview at that
Yep.
time.
Yeah.
I really felt like I was reading something I shouldn't, or I just
It
questioned
makes
the
you feel like
source.
porn or something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's like, no, this is just a science book that tells you the Earth is 13 billion years old. And so,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know,
Yeah. Well, and something else that's wild to me is, as somebody who is a devout Christian, the way that we can look down on other Christians and not turn the mirror around. For example, I remember when I was in 6th grade, there was a kid who wasn't allowed to do the science project because it implied that dinosaurs were millions of years old. And my teacher was like, Billy doesn't have to do the project. He's doing his own project. And I remember thinking, like, that's crazy. Who doesn't know dinosaurs are 1,000,000 years old? Like, duh, God invented dinosaurs 1,000,000 years ago. And not being able to say, why don't I need evidence for anything else? Like, why don't
yeah.
that's
Yeah.
weird.
Well,
It's
and
interesting.
and not only that, you spoke. Sometimes it's just the way that they talk about the church up the street.
Literally.
Oh,
Yeah.
those guys and the way they're doing things. You don't want to be part of, and every other church except for ours is doing it wrong, and
Yes,
it's like,
yes.
you know,
Yeah, I told Vince, you're almost better off being an atheist than being the wrong kind of evangelical Christian. You're
right.
almost more salvageable not believing in God at all than being a Presbyterian
Yeah.
or a Methodist. I've
Yeah.
never learned so much about how Baptists aren't real Christians until I started this podcast. And people are like, "Oh, you grew up Baptist? I thought you said you were Christian." And I'm like,
Yeah.
whoa, excuse me.
Yeah.
Who are you?
Yeah, Baptists are different. So there was a joke back in the day that guy dies and goes to heaven, and he's walking around heaven, and there's this long hallway, and there's all these different doors. And so they walk past this one door, and there's these guys in there, and they've got on these robes, and this one guy's walking down the middle of the aisle. And he's got this smoke coming out of the thing. The guy's like, "Who are those people?" He goes, "Oh, those are our Catholic brothers." Oh, okay. And go down the hallway a little more, and there's another doorway, and he opens this door. They look in that doorway, and everybody's got dressed in black, and some of them will have long hair, and beards and this kind of stuff, you know. It's like, well, who are those people? Oh, those are our Jewish brothers and sisters. You go, oh, okay, great. He goes down another one and he looks in there and he sees a choir, and people have the choir robes on and that kind of stuff. And he says, who are those people in there? And I guess the saint, one of the saints looks at him and says, shh, that's our Baptist brothers and sisters. Come on. And he goes, why are we whispering? He says, they think they're the only ones here.
That's hilarious. That's hilarious. I think they're the only ones.
Yeah,
that's hilarious.
Yeah, I think they're the only ones in here. So
that's good. Yeah. Oh yeah. I remember I remember being able to look at, say, for example, Pentecostals and being like, they think when they go to heaven, they wash the feet of Jesus with their hair. Ew.
Right.
And you're like, your thoughts and opinions are also crazy. It just doesn't involve growing your hair out long. Like, tell me more about the things that you believe. Like, because especially when you ask a Christian, you're like, what about Zeus and Hercules? Do you believe in them? And they're like, of course not. And you're like, well, why not? And they're like, because that's ridiculous. And you're like, why is it ridiculous? And I'm like, that it's nonsense. Like, read it. It's nonsense. It never happened. And I'm like, an angry God in the sky with a son he sent to Earth is crazy nonsense and never happened. So we agree.
Yeah.
Right? But no, but it's different. But it's different. And I don't mean this insultingly at all. I have lots of Christian listeners and people who like, even pastors who listen to this, and they've told me they share this with their congregation. You gotta know it sounds crazy. Right. At least have an argument. I'm preparing you to argue with people like us. Like, you got to know, you got to have an answer for why your version of that same story makes sense. And the much older version that's been around a lot closer to the beginning of time than you have doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, one of the things I learned going through this whole deconstruction was I found myself studying the Bible more and more as I heard different things. See, that's the thing. When you're like we were going to church 3 times a week, every time the doors were open, but there's not that much study that really took place. The same sermons got preached over and over and over. I mean, it wasn't unusual for me to be like, yeah, so what he's getting ready to say after this is this, and then they'd get to that point in the sermon. I'm like, yes, there you go.
Yep.
Well, we heard the same sermons a lot over and over, and we didn't really get into the challenging aspects of them. And so when I first started hearing that the Bible never condemned slavery, I thought, surely somewhere, and so you go on a hunt for it. And so next thing you know, you spend 2 days in this whole slavery, rabbit hole, and so you know more about it. Or the Midianites, go in there and kill everybody, but keep the virgins. You don't really.
What are you going to do with those? Leave them to the Lord?
Right. So you don't really study a lot of that. And so a lot of times atheists know their Bible better than the believers, because for a lot of the believers, it's a lot of a community feeling. We go there, we sing some songs, we talk about who's on the prayer list, we schedule weddings and funerals and this kind of stuff, but we don't really ask each other challenging questions. And how do you know this? And does this actually make sense? Was the Genesis account, was that order of creation, do we think that's the correct order? Or is there other information that, I remember being told as a kid that the church was under attack, right? And it was a key phrase that they always,
War on Christmas.
Yeah, church is under attack. I remember hearing that when I was growing up. And in my young mind, what I thought it meant was that when you leave this place and you leave the tribe here and you go out into the world, you might hear somebody say some cuss words. You might hear some music that you shouldn't be listening to. You might see some movies that you shouldn't see. You might see behavior from people and that they're living in sin. It was that kind of. I thought that when they said the church was under attack, that they were just talking about not everybody had the same lifestyle as we did, right?
Right.
I did not know that at this time that there were debates taking place, that there were active challenges being posed.
Scientific studies being held.
Yes. I didn't know those things. And they're certainly not going to say the church is under attack. And by the way, this weekend down at Vanderbilt is where you can go see the attack, or you can get a recording of it. They're having a debate at Oxford, or they're having they didn't tell you the locations of any of these attacks because they didn't want you to hear that information.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And they did want you to be separate from the outside world and just maintain living like our tribe has
right.
declared as the right way to live. So they did want you to say like that. But yeah, as I started going through this deconstruction and as I started stumbling upon a lot of these debates and a lot of these, things that were taking place, that's when I discovered that's what they meant about the church was under attack. But they never told me when and where,
right.
And so there was, but yeah, it was under attack back then.
And in any other instance, if something is under attack, you're told when, you're told where, and you're told how to defend yourself. You might even be encouraged to go and defend others, right? But for some reason, this type of attack, you just plug your ears and stay far away from and just hide in your Bible or the church or your faith.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
Yes, it's been an experience going through all this, and I'm still in those phases that you talked about. I don't think I'm as angry as I was at one point.
Right.
I'm a little bit beyond that. I'm more looking for. Have you told people about the group that we're a part of in Nashville and the Conversation Coalition and all that?
Yep.
So one of our team leaders sent out that video a few weeks ago. It was a sit down with Brett Weinstein and Dave Rubin. I went back and watched that, and I watched not only that segment. I went back and watched the whole thing. And Weinstein said something in there. He said, if we can get to a point where we're viewing these things as important but not literal,
right,
then maybe we can have a good conversation.
Yes.
And that kind of stuck with me because I can get value out of a lot of different works of literature.
Yes.
I mean, even something as simple as, say, Romeo and Juliet.
Yes.
A guy has such love for his girl that if he can't be with her, he'd rather not be alive, and so he'd rather not even continue living. And so I could take that and say that's an example of a selfless, love. For another human being. Okay, great. I can take that. I'm sure in a lot of Dostoevsky, I hear a lot of people mention Dostoevsky a lot, and so I'm getting ready to get a lot of his books and dive into that. But he
Aesop's Fables,
and so I wouldn't have a problem looking at the Bible and saying, okay, I can find some good things in there.
Right.
Not all of them, but I could pick through there and I could find some good things. Fine. Yes. I am willing to get to the point where I could say there are things in there that are important but not literal.
Right. Yes.
But that's a big line in the sand for a lot of. They're not. Most believers are not going to meet you there.
That's like I have always thought that the Bible was originally written as a book of fables to teach us lessons. I have no problem with that. Jonah and the whale. That's a fable, in my opinion. Adam and Eve, I get what the message is. Honor thy father, do what you're supposed to do, or you get punished, right? Or beware of, snakes that'll lead you astray. I get it. Okay. Like there are lessons throughout the Bible that if you look at it from like an Aesop's Fables perspective, you're like, I get that message. But when somebody looks me in the face and is like, no, literally, all human beings came from the same two people. Right. Literally, the piece of bread was split 40,000 times, and the one fish was split 40,000 times. That is a literal, that I'm like, guys, I was agreeing with you for a minute. It's a great message. I get it.
Or the whole young earth. Everybody on earth came from Noah and his, earlier Adam and Eve. But then at some point, a lot of people got killed, and none of those people passed on their genes, and it was just Noah and his family, and everybody came from there, and all the animals and all the diversity of
Right.
plant life, animal life, human beings,
Yes.
cultures, everything was bottlenecked into that one time frame right there.
And also, if it was, that proves evolution is the correct theory. Because if you've got 2 of every animal on that ark, guess what? They've evolved since then to
Right.
become what they are today. So it's just like, it's stuff like that where I'm like, in order to get out of the angry atheist phase, one, you have to understand the people around you are doing truly what they think is best.
Yeah.
They, like, your parents did not take you to church to harm you. They took you to church because they believe and they were told that the creator of the universe wants them to do that for their child. And that is the way to make sure you go to heaven, not hell. It's like, okay, I get it. I'm not mad at those people anymore. They literally were just doing what they were told. They were also told that smoking was good for you, right? Like, we get misinformation all the time.
Yeah.
They don't do that anymore, right?
Right.
And then you think, okay, even the people in leadership at that church were doing the best they can. I don't believe that if I walk down to the church at the end of the block, that pastor is an evil guy who's not actually a Christian. He's just puppeteering everybody. He has dedicated his life to making sure that he tells people what he thinks God wants them to do and to say. Now, whether or not he convinces people to tithe a little bit more through shady practices, that's none of my business, right? but I honestly believe up until a certain point, people are just doing what they're told out of fear of burning in hell forever, and that's scary.
Yeah.
Revelations is scary, hell is scary, eternal damnation is scary. So of course, when you say, I don't think I believe in God, everyone who loves you freaks out. Because they picture you writhing in a pit in hell when they were here to help you, and for whatever reason they failed, and they take it personally.
I mean, I would like to think that was I can't say that fear is one that I've seen or that I've, I know that they should. If they really believe, then you ought to be really concerned for my soul, and you ought to be, if you're a believer and you know for a fact that I'm an atheist, right? You ought to be concerned for my soul, and you ought to be doing everything. But what if I died tomorrow and you hadn't shared the gospel with me? Wouldn't you feel some kind of a...
Well, they did share the gospel, but you rejected it. There's the other angle that not everybody experiences, and that's being Southern. And that's a whole, what are the neighbors going to say? What's your auntie going to say? What's your grandma? What's the man down at the hardware store going to say? He's known you since you were 5. Do you want to break his heart? You've got the religious, oh my gosh, you're going to burn in hell. And the, I'm going to be really embarrassed at Walmart mixed together, in one pot. But again, if they told you about Jesus and you rejected him, that's not on them anymore, Gary. That's on you.
Right. And then when they finally come to terms with it, it's just bless your heart.
Bless his heart.
Bless his heart.
Bless his heart. We just did our damnedest, I tell you. But do you feel like you're still on this journey? Like, do you feel like you still learn new things all the time, or that your opinion will ever change, or that you'll ever be maybe more agnostic leaning, or will you just become more set in your atheist ways, do you think? What do you think?
I don't foresee any agnosticism or certainly no belief. I don't see me shying away from atheism at all. I may learn to be more gentle, and be more, my first sit down with our conversation group was with Tim, and I had some fire in my belly. I had some steam to blow, and thankfully he was very gracious and
such a nice guy.
Beautiful personality, and strong in his faith, but also totally comfortable with different challenges and that kind of stuff. he was very gracious and let me blow a lot of steam.
Mhm.
And that was very kind of him, and I've thanked him since then.
Yeah.
But I think I'm coming off of that a little bit,
Yeah.
and I'm looking more for a little bit of connection these days,
Right.
with with believers and also non. I'm still so fascinated by the whole concept, and I was headed out to a job the other day, and it wasn't a long drive. It was like a 15-minute drive, and I think I passed probably 18 churches on the way. There was a couple of intersections that I got to, and there was a different church on each corner of the
Each
intersection.
corner.
There'd be a
Yes.
large Presbyterian, a large Methodist, a large Catholic church, and a large.
Those aren't real churches, Gary. Those aren't real churches. That's why they need more, because those aren't real.
Right. I said something to the guy working with me. I pulled up at the intersection. I'm like, look at all this land right here, and all of these large buildings. And so I'm just fascinated by the whole industry, and I really feel like it's an industry
It is.
nowadays. When you see the buildings and the books and the money that comes in,
Yes.
I mean, I'm somewhat charismatic, and I could easily, if I chose to, hey, you know what? We're going in the church business.
You're gonna start your own cult, Gary? Is that what you're gonna do?
Look, if this whole granite thing doesn't work out, option number 2.
That's hilarious. But I mean,
it
really
does seem
though,
like it does seem like an industry to me.
it is. It is.
To a large degree. And I know that
Yes.
that's probably mainly only with the leadership. Obviously, the congregations don't feel like they're feeding an industry. They don't feel that way.
Right.
But that's the whole thing. It's like going to a magic show, or like going to a, except you're going there multiple times a week sometimes, and you're paying money, regularly to,
Right.
to do it, so
Right.
I
Right. The
can't.
problem is not with God. The problem is with the multi-level marketing scheme that is religion. Right?
Right.
Never had a
Well,
problem with God. Big problem with religion.
yeah, I mean, and you hear that a lot of times these days. People will say, "Well, it's not religion; it's a relationship." So they try to get, they really try to steer away from the whole I'm Presbyterian or Methodist, or, and they a lot of times they won't even go so far as to say I'm non-denominational. They just say I'm just a Christ follower.
Yes.
I just follow
Yes.
Jesus.
Yes. Absolutely.
Um,
I talk to
so
so many more people these days who don't want to associate with any religion. They say, I believe there's a God and I believe in Jesus's teaching, but I don't consider myself a Christian or a Baptist or a Methodist or a Catholic because
okay,
of the religious undertones.
yeah, but they wouldn't even go so far as just Christian.
Nope. They're just
Okay,
they all say like I don't want to put a label on it. Like there's no label. I believe there's a God, or some people say I'm spiritual. I believe that there's a higher being. I believe in the teachings of Jesus, which the teachings of Jesus actually aren't bad. The red letters in the Bible, they're really not bad. He was anti selling stuff in the church. He didn't want a merch table in that church, right? And
yeah,
so they say I take all the teachings of Jesus. I hear this all the time, especially with like millennials and Gen Z. They say I follow the teachings of Jesus. Call that what you will, but I do not identify with Christianity, which I think is very interesting.
yeah, yeah. That is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if somebody were listening to this
Mhm.
and maybe they hear themselves in your story, maybe they're married to somebody they met at church, but they're the ones feeling less and less devoted to God, or maybe they've kind of come out to their spouse and they've said, I don't know that I believe in this, or their family, or they're considering starting those things and they're afraid. What advice would you give them as somebody who's steps ahead of them in that process?
First of all, be open and honest with people, and yourself. Don't mislead anybody.
Yes.
Don't go along to get along. Um, you have to express yourself, and you have to be
Yep.
honest about where you're at, and um, because it doesn't make anything better for anybody long term
Right.
if you're not just an open book.
Right.
So that would be my first thing, is just honesty, and be honest with those people around you. If you're going through
Yeah.
this, look for information, try to explore, and find out what you can about different topics.
Right.
So education and honesty, I think those two will get you a long way.
Absolutely.
Um,
Absolutely.
and you're not going to feel bad about it later on.
Right.
If you're just learning things and being honest about who you are and where you're at.
Yeah.
So
100%. I feel like
yeah,
educating yourself on why you believe what you believe is so important. Even
yeah,
if you're convinced that you're still a Christian, if you can answer why or how or other than just parroting something somebody told you, if you can truly tell us why you think, you feel, you know, you've read, that alone is such a big first step. So I couldn't agree more. Researching and reading and learning is so important, especially if you have questions, because those questions will go nowhere. They will
yeah.
stick around.
And
And then,
as far as you're able to be compassionate and empathize with the people on the other side of that, because as
yeah,
you start exploring these things, it's probably going to be a little bit of a shock to those around
yes,
you. You may
yep,
or may not get good reactions. Hopefully, they get good reactions, and people just love them
yeah,
wherever they're at. But be prepared, because that's not always the case.
right,
Um, but you're not responsible for everybody else. You're responsible for you,
yep.
and so you just need to be the best you that you can be, and educate. Get education, and be honest about where you're at, and treat people well. So
Yeah, that's such a great point. You are not responsible for other people, and you're definitely not responsible for their feelings either.
right,
That's yeah. Well, Gary, this has just been an excellent conversation. I've really enjoyed hearing your story and getting to know you and just getting your perspective on stuff. I've always wanted to just kind of deep dive with you and just, learn a little bit more about who you are. And for anybody listening, in the notes, whether you're watching on YouTube or listening on an audio platform, you can find information on Conversation Coalition. You can see some of our past conversations. I'll link some of our other videos and our YouTube channel in the notes so you can check those out. But if you have any questions for Gary or comments or thoughts, feel free to write an email. You can find the email there in the notes, or if you're on YouTube, you can leave them in the comments, and I'll make sure he gets all of them. And maybe we can do a part 2 if you got a lot of questions. Maybe there's a part 2.
So I first found out about you on the Freedom from Religion Honorary Board. That's where I kind of first stumbled upon your name, and then I started looking up your work. And I was just so curious about which came first. Was it your love for sciences that led you to the freedom from religion and atheism and agnosticism? Or was it that you first felt that separation from religion and then decided to pursue science?
I don't think it was in order. I think it was parallel. I think as a kid, I'm going to guess maybe around 11 or 12. So I was raised around plenty of religion. Family was Catholic. My father actually wrote music for the Catholic Church, had a lot of, family, friends and acquaintances and things like that. People of very deep faith. At the same time, as a little kid, I'm figuring out, what do I like? What am I good at? Turns out I really like going out in the woods and flipping over logs and finding, salamanders or catching frogs and things like this. So my interest in biology and nature was kind of just something separate and parallel. And then but I do think it was sometime around that age that, it just never landed with me, sort of religious, instruction or education or things like that, I'm looking back on it now from a long time ago, but I've thought about this a lot, and I had sort of a second wave of exposure, because I actually I went to a secular middle school, but I went to a Catholic high school. So,
oh, interesting.
Kind of re-immersed, and I'd never gone to Catholic schools before that. So I was already, let's just say, skeptical.
Yeah.
By the time I entered high school, which made a new school an interesting experience.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
And so I think, I think and think back to that time that I was pretty I just sort of felt like, whatever these people were talking about and how they had been, impacted and their sense of faith, I didn't have those feelings. And I just thought, well, I don't know, it's kind of like the arrow missed me, it's just like I wasn't inclined in that direction in some way. And so the science interest was really just parallel to that. I think, later as both a professional scientist and a scholar, you start trying to, wrestle this. And really, I should tell you, like in Catholic high school, say, for example, the subject of evolution, I didn't know there was any fuss. I was taught evolution just straight up. And I didn't know until I got out of high school that there were people that struggled with evolution. So anyway, that's a bit of a wander, but it wasn't a 1-2 thing. I think it was just sort of parallel. Like, if I had been better at baseball, I would have been a baseball player. Okay.
Right.
I was interested in nature and critters and just the religious angle, because I was exposed a lot in the home and, in school, in high school, I had plenty of chances to sort of absorb this and make it sort of part of my outlook. And it just, again, I've described it often as I think it just didn't take.
Yeah. I think that's a really good way to put it. I feel like there's a certain age where a lot of religious people, I grew up Southern Baptist. I think there's a certain age where it's not that you start to argue necessarily, you just start to question the things that don't make sense, because on one hand, you're learning about things like evolution and science and how the planet came to be. And then on the other hand, you're hearing stories that tell you the complete opposite, or they don't necessarily add up. And so I think that's a good way to put it. I think that's a
really
it does sort of way.
That is probably the germ of against that sort of skeptical thinking of just sort of like, really, is that, and then probably if you catch, I was thinking about this a little bit. I don't know if you saw the HBO series on George Carlin the other day.
Yeah. I've seen clips. I haven't seen the whole thing.
Yeah. So I'm thinking back about that same time as when I got my first George Carlin album. And he I think it was Class Clown, where he's talking about all the shenanigans they were up to in school in Catholic school and things like this. And then I learned that there were sort of people that kind of gave you permission to, or maybe a roadmap to sort of, act up and sort of ask a lot of questions, but to try to do it with sort of good humor, right? Not as, not in a nasty way, but sort of like, really?
Yep.
Maybe that's the birth of sort of, sort of Carlin's sort of humor, and probably, Monty Python humor, which you start seeing on American airwaves about that time. And sort of the way they're also asking questions and, poking a little fun at least political establishment and things like that. And those things start to seep in your head as a kid. And it's like, hey, wait a second. All the grownups don't believe all this stuff that you're hearing. It's not like, it's not like everybody believes the same stuff. No, they don't. So there's room in here to kind of think your own way. And that was just very appealing to me, that to have the chance to sort of figure it out for myself.
Yeah. It's like, first you listen to George Carlin, then you watch Life of Brian, and it's all downhill from there. There's no coming back.
It certainly did shape my taste in comedy, that's for sure.
So speaking of comedy, you had mentioned that you had written a piece around comedy, and I would love to kind of just hear what you had to say.
Well, a recent book I wrote it's called A Series of Fortunate Events, and it looks at the role of chance in the making of the planet, in the making of life, in the making of us as individuals. And chance is another slippery subject for certain theologies, because certain theologies that want things to sort of want events to be controlled or designed. Chance is sort of, the opposite of that thinking. And as I was sort of wrapping up this book, which I think has a certain lightheartedness to it. I mean, the science is serious, but I try to, tell it through stories and again, have a little bit of a humorous bent. But I thought about how many comedians I knew, and that would be, back to George Carlin, or, Sarah Silverman, or Bill Maher, or Ricky Gervais, or Bill Burr, or you can go back, or writers like Kurt Vonnegut. I liked, as a kid, again, I probably discovered Vonnegut about that same age. And Vonnegut sort of also was winking at you like, hey, the grownups, they don't know what they're talking about.
Right.
Go ahead, think for yourself, kid.
Yeah.
Was a strong message in Vonnegut. And I thought, all these folks brought up religion in their acts or in their work. And I always thought that was kind of dangerous, especially think about our culture today, which is, if you bring up something that people might find, that's so dear to their identity, then, there's a risk that you're going to be, canceled, ostracized, whatever. But again, all these comedians were doing it, and likewise with Monty Python and things like that. And so I thought, why was this such common subject matter for all these comedians who I really liked? There may be a relationship there as to why I liked them. And so I read a lot of interviews, but in writing the book, I reached out, for example, to Eric Idle, and generous guy, responded.
That's awesome. That's so cool.
And he really hit a note that then I found again and again and again in interviews or writings or by various comedians as truth tellers. And you sort, and I don't know why I had, it took me a long time to sort of put these dots together, but as truth tellers, when you sort of think a comedian is often sort of creating some situation that's made up to get a yuck or something like this. But no, in this area, of course, they were sort of holding up a mirror, and the idea was to show you a bit of truth. And of course, if it's done with some finesse and you get a chuckle out of it, it kind of makes the medicine go down. It's a little easier to talk about these subjects, or to use, as Vonnegut did, things like science fiction or things like this to sort of hold up a mirror and go, really, folks, are you so darn sure that this is exactly how things are? So anyway, I just really enjoy. To me, that sort of came as an insight. And I thought, the two groups of people who seem, in this case, least inclined to think that everything happens for a reason in the world, are scientists and comedians. I thought, what do scientists and comedians have in common?
Right.
And I arrived at that after sort of consulting Eric Idle and other comedians. So to me, that was just a nice, a pleasing insight. I mean, truth telling sounds like it's a noble quality. We scientists certainly like to think that we are in pursuit of the truth and try to give the truth the best we can.
Right.
I didn't really ever think of comedians as truth tellers until that was the insight. I thought, and that's sort of makes comedy work, because this was pointed out by other comedians. Often a joke has an element of truth to it. We recognize the element of truth, and it may be juxtaposed against some absurdity or whatever. But often, we're making fun of our own foibles as humans, right?
Exactly.
And we're like, oh yeah, we are like we are, and the best comedians are able to both get an idea across and have you chuckle at it. And I think that was a big message to me as a scientist, that we scientists are often trying to, it's like, if you just had the information that was in our heads, so this is what we're trying to do all the time, is say, let me share my knowledge with you. But you look at comedian style and the fact that they're able to talk about serious subjects while entertaining people. I thought, well, goodness, that's a page I should take right out of their playbook and try to be, a more interesting and entertaining speaker or conversationalist.
Yeah, absolutely. And as a comedian myself, I absolutely recognize the difference between when you tell somebody a fact. A lot of times they're like, no, that's not the case, blah, blah, blah. That's not what I'm about, or that's not how we are. But as a comedian, if you make a joke about it, especially if you include your own personal self-deprecation, if you make that joke like, we do this, don't we? People are like, yeah, we do. And it's the exact same fact, or it's the exact same, accusation. But for whatever reason, when somebody presents it in science, it gets rejected or it gets questioned. And when somebody presents it with humor, it gets accepted, and people are just like, yeah, I guess that's what we do.
Yeah. So I think, from a viewpoint of storytelling or, and humor or other forms of sort of entertainment, people like novels, of course, these are the, various arts allow you to sort of wrap these serious issues in something that it just makes them, the exploration of them more palatable than just, a scientist coming out and saying, well, you have no evidence for that. That's kind of the end of the discussion, right?
Yeah.
Not much fun in that at all. So.
Right. Is there a particular subject or focus that you think is very, very important to get across to people, whether it's evolution or anything else that you're like, I just really wish people would like agree with this and absorb this if they learn nothing else?
Well, again, I've had lots of discussions over the decades, right?
Right.
And as an evolutionary biologist, I've certainly run into resistance, either in the classroom or on campuses or whatever about evolution. I guess, look, I'd like to think that I've gained some wisdom over the years of where that comes from. People are raised differently. You were raised differently. Certain things you were not exposed to, or maybe you were told some things were out of bounds and or that they were actually being propagated by people that had, malicious intentions and things like that. So you understand people, it's a big country, big world. People are raised differently. I guess just you lament as a scientist that if that closes people off to either hearing specifically what scientists might be able to share about the world, or even generally, you're missing out on something. The ability to kind of, just in the last 50 or 60 years, the things we've learned. I'll give you an example. One of my favorite stories. When first discovered, actually, the scientific community had difficulty believing it, but I think now it's probably widely recognized in the popular culture that the Earth was hit by an asteroid 66 million years ago. This asteroid really changed the course of life on the planet. The evidence for that asteroid is all over the planet. I've been to many sites myself where you can basically pick up fallout material and point to the boundary and all this kind of stuff. And we know that, dinosaurs go right up to that fallout boundary and none afterwards, right?
Right.
So this really pivotal event in sort of the story of life on Earth, we didn't know that in the 1970s. The evidence for that was published in 1980. And as I said, it took probably about 10 years for the scientific community to sort of fully accept it, because you kind of needed other pieces of evidence to feel really persuaded.
Right.
And I sort of think, gosh, if I can't interest you with asteroids and dinosaurs, what shot do I have with, with other pieces of biology, right? There's not much better stuff than that. So I just think I just lament if people close themselves off and feel that somehow science is, either, an opponent to them or something to be, kind of swept aside. It's too bad, because in terms of a role in our culture, science has grown ever more powerful in its tools and its sort of perception. Just as I said, just in the last 40 or 50 years, things that we've learned are really kind of awesome and striking and powerful.
Right.
About how the world works, about how nature, pieces of nature work, about how our own bodies work, things like this. And it's sad to me if people feel they can't go near that, or people feel their children can't go near that,
right?
In classrooms and things like that. Because I think they're missing out on part of, Earth's story and the human story and things like this.
Yeah, you're like, stegosauruses are all I've got. Like, if that doesn't entice you, then I don't know what else.
Exactly. But it may be a slippery slope, because once you start talking about dinosaurs, and then, the mammals really took off when the dinosaurs were gone, and eventually that gets you to primates, and eventually that gets you to humans. That's a narrative that for certain folks, none of that works.
The buck stops here.
Yeah.
Do you, I've always wondered, do you find that, and I don't know exactly how much time you've spent internationally, but do you find that your ideas and your findings and your teachings are accepted any more overseas than in America? Tell me about that.
The climate here in the US is distinctly different. So Europe has a really big scientific community. So probably the one place I've spent the most time, was just there a couple of weeks ago, is Europe. And, they're just, take some place like England, right? Really much of the industrial and scientific revolution came out of England and Scotland. And, really the rethinking about the planet, about life, lots of discoveries, lots of great thinkers came from there. And it's sort of baked into their culture. These are the people, I mean, Darwin's at is buried at Westminster Abbey, for goodness sake, right?
Yeah.
And I think also in their media, in their mass media, as kids grow up, they're exposed to all this as sort of with pride, the great thinkers and scientists of Britain. And we just don't have that tradition. And, whatever the numbers may be, I've always thought it's perhaps 25 or 30% of the country, wouldn't embrace, for example, evolutionary science in the way that it's embraced in other parts of the world. And so there's just part of American society that feels cut off from, that narrative of, how we understand life, to be.
Right. Absolutely. And I feel like also there is a protection of religion in the United States that doesn't seem to exist anywhere else, with the exception of maybe parts of the Middle East. I feel like there is something about America that makes the religious, what's the word I'm looking for? Like the religious temperature in America seems to be that an unseen force is attacking religious people, and they have to fight with all their might to protect it, even if that means ignoring science, even if that means ignoring, health and discoveries and beneficial things for your life. If it comes into contact with your religious beliefs and they don't line up, religion has to come first.
Yeah, I mean, I think pretty much often in any kind of duel between God and science, for many people, God's going to come first, or your interpretation of what that means is going to come first. That's sure. Well, first of all, of course, freedom of religion is enshrined in our Constitution, at least in the Bill of Rights. And that means that sometimes if people feel that freedom is infringed, say in public schools, they've pushed back against what is in, what's being taught in schools. Now, that's been generally held up. It's been held up in the Supreme Court that, of course, the teaching of evolution is appropriate in public schools,
right?
And that the opposition to it being religiously motivated, it would be inappropriate because of the Establishment Clause of the Constitution to favor one group, to favor a religious perspective. Nonetheless, because, certainly historically, presently it seems that maybe younger generations are a little less religious than previous generations, but historically, with a very large, Christian population in the United States, and our history, a lot of people came to the U.S. and started, various splits of branches of the Protestant religions, really in reaction to what was happening in Europe. That Europe was too liberal in the 19th century, for example, and that gave us lots of various strains of Protestantism in the United States. So the idea that this was, a place where people could pursue their religious freedom, and they were, in some cases, pursuing it in opposition to what was perceived as liberalization in Europe. That's part of our history. That's part of our fiber, and so that's why I think that's some of the explanation why. And you have this regional differences in sort of the both which strands of Protestantism are most practiced and what that means in terms of people's behavior and outlooks. We're a big country with with not as long a history, and of course we're a young country, but still this has been going on long enough that there's certain trends that that are pretty obvious to people, and it's it is very different from Europe. Which makes my European colleagues sort of. It's more than 50 times I've been asked, "Hey, Sean, what's going on over there?" And we start to have these discussions about, sort of the history of the U.S. and how it was settled, and how religious freedom has been handled, and challenges in public schools and things like that.
Right. And I can think of, off the top of my head, I can think of maybe 2 countries that were founded by people who either were rejected from their own country or left their own country specifically for the pursuit of their religious beliefs. And I think that is, like, as you mentioned, one of the core foundations of why we are this. The rest of the world probably views us as a little bit of fanaticists, because there are so few countries that started that way. And so there's that inherent need to just surround and protect at all costs.
But of course, interesting being also the unique country where the whole world has, emigrated.
Yeah.
Right? It's like, but we've got, everybody here with
Yeah.
all sorts of, which is a darn good reason to have freedom of religion, because that
Absolutely.
freedom is also what not just the freedom to be, you know, more in reaction, but freedom whether you were going to be religious or not. The fact
Right.
that all creeds or no creed was, you know, we're welcome in the country. You know, on the one hand, that's a really important beacon, and that's drawn, of course, you know, such strength, you know, so much strength of the country is drawn from people
Absolutely.
that have come here, you know, for all sorts of reasons, but that sort of diversity came with them.
Absolutely. And I feel like the best way to learn and to kind of expand your knowledge is to surround yourself with people like that, who think the complete opposite of you or who believe the complete opposite of you. And so it's this, I don't want to say double-edged sword, but it's this interesting dichotomy that we have in this country where you can believe whatever you want to believe. You can come here and you are welcome to pray to whoever you want to pray. If you want to pray at all, you're welcome to be a Scientologist or Muslim or Baptist or Catholic or whatever you want. And then at the same time, we also have such a heavy hand with Christianity in our laws. So it's, on one hand, we're saying, you know, believe whatever you want. And then on the other hand, it's a little bit difficult sometimes to believe whatever you want, depending on where you are.
It's the majority
denomination
for sure. Although, of course, big differences within those denominations. But I'll mention something. We're of a little bit different generation, Sydney. I think I'm just going to take a guess that we have a little bit different generations. You know, growing up, and I grew up in kind of a mixed blue, white collar neighborhood in Ohio, in a city in Ohio. Three things we never talked about. We never talked about, you know, families or households, never talked about who they voted for.
Yep.
You didn't talk about your religious differences. People went off on Sunday or Saturday to wherever they went, you know, and you didn't talk about how much money you made.
Yes.
And I think there was, and when I say not talking, one might say, well, not talking, that's not good either. But I mean, sort of like saying respecting the privacy.
Right.
And the differences that exist among people. And that, you know, if you went house to house, I don't know, you know, best friends are Lutheran, Catholic, Methodist, United Church of Christ, Jewish in school. I mean, what do you do with that? You're like, well, everybody's whatever they are, and there you go. And people are going to vote differently, or your parents are going to vote differently, is the case. I'm just kind of talking about kids' impressions of the world.
Right.
And then, you know, you don't talk about who makes how much, you know, my parent makes more than your parent. I mean, that's an open invitation to trouble.
That's a fist fight waiting to happen.
A lot of wisdom that sort of the social mores of the time was that it was impolite.
Right.
To sort of not, I mean, you could say, I mean, it's not like you would hide. You didn't hide that, you know, you were active in the Lutheran church or something, but it just wasn't differences among people weren't emphasized. It was just let it be. And, you know, I've seen a sea change in, wow. I mean, talking about who you vote for, my God, this has become, you know, the ultimate identity question. And then, and because, and look how divisive that is. And, you know, religion, it can be a source of conflict and tension there.
Yeah.
And I don't know what to say about money. Everybody's thinking about money, I guess. So, but you know, tax the rich, eat the rich. I don't know what it stands for, but this is, you know, in a country that has such people of so many different backgrounds who got here for so many different reasons. There was a certain wisdom in that. And if you play up these distinctions, then you are drawing divisions. And I think we're all feeling some remorse that's where things have gone.
Yeah, I was about to ask you, do you think it would be almost beneficial to have it the way that it used to be? Because I remember even when I was a kid, it was like, don't ask about money, don't ask about religion, don't ask about like that sort of thing. Do you almost think like we would benefit from kind of that social behavior? Or
I feel saying that, I feel like such the old guy going, well, kids, back in my day, we didn't do that. I'm certainly not the first person to say, I mean, lots of people have made this sort of comment. I think, you know, I suspect because I have friends of all sorts of, stripes, and colleagues of all sorts of stripes that, mostly there seems to be a pretty noisy faction over here and a pretty noisy faction over there, and that most people would rather kind of be in the middle and turn the noise down.
Yeah.
But we don't seem to be able, we haven't sort of figured out how to get there. So, but I want to go back. I just want to point to something that you said about, you think it's best to go out and talk to people who actually have different viewpoints. 1,000%. This is so important. And I'm very, very worried. So, I've been an academic all my life. I'm very worried that this is even something that academia, where university campuses, which was the place where this was going to happen, if you go to college, if you go to a 4-year college or a two-year college, you go there and you have the chance to blend with people of different backgrounds, around professors that, know things about history and religion and sociology and science and all these sorts of things. And if we don't embrace those diversity of viewpoints, what do we get? And if we don't encourage the diversity of viewpoints, so I think that, you've probably read about this or heard about this in various ways, or maybe you've experienced it, but it's actually alarming to me that we've reached this point where certain viewpoints are deemed unhearable, that they are, can't be listened to. And that puts you on such a slippery slope of, censorship and closed-mindedness and actually sort of, excluding people who have something to contribute, and also excluding them based on their view on one particular issue. They're now, ostracized or whatever, and you're just going to ignore all the complexity of whatever they may have to think about 19 other issues. I mean, you're banned on the basis of a viewpoint about one particular issue, which of course is an issue, issue around which there may not be consensus or unanimity. And for that to be happening on campuses is terribly alarming.
Absolutely. I tell people all the time, the most I feel like I ever grew as an intellectual, as a person, as just entirely as a human being, was when I was in college. I was in debate for many years. And I was in a forum called IPDA, which means you find out who your partner is going to be right before the round. You find out what the topic is going to be right before the round, and you find out what side you're going to be right before the round. And you are forced to do research, even if you're on a side that you would never be in real life. You are forced for that half hour to do research to support the opposite of what it is you personally believe. And I learned so much about who I actually was, what I actually thought, because I remember I was one of those young, 19, 21-year-olds who just thought I knew everything. And all it took was the right amount of people asking me why about my strongest opinions for me to be like, my brain to short circuit and be like, wait, why do I think that? I was told that by somebody, wasn't I? Like, isn't that the right way to think? And I feel like even if, say, for example, you are Catholic or Muslim or something like that, even if you do all the research and you read every religious text there is and you speak to people from all different religions, even if at the end of the day you are still exactly where you were to begin with, at least now you know why. At least now you know, I believe this, I believe this, I don't believe this, I don't believe that. And I feel like that should belong in all aspects. That should belong in politics, in religion, in any belief system, even in social issues. And I think I don't want to lose that. And I never want to live in a society where everybody is exactly like me, because then you don't learn anything.
No, now you don't learn anything. I don't think those societies function very well.
No.
They're not really in a good position to handle change or, difference in the outside world.
Right.
No, absolutely. And I think even, whatever that exploration, wherever it leads you, you're going to certainly have insight into others, maybe empathy. And, probably one of the most important human characteristics is our ability to have empathy for others, regardless of our differences, right? We can cheer or cry at the fate or experiences of a fellow human being whom we've never met, will never know, may even be fictional.
Yeah.
And that's what we, that's what we need to sort of get by and as a group, in the world. And so I think that's sort of the, the enlightened approach, and walling ourselves off from others, and just not hearing, not seeing. That's just it's a very limited way to live.
Yeah. Do you remember, maybe this was when you were younger, maybe it was recently, do you ever remember a time where you made a statement or you said something and somebody called you out on it, and it wasn't until that moment where you were like, oh, that was kind of an offhanded or small-minded thing?
Yeah, no, I think part of my baggage was I sort of had to kind of fight my way out of Catholicism.
Yeah, I would love to hear about that.
At least argue my way out of it.
Yeah.
Because it was considered sort of, the default state. It was how I was raised, and I found myself in a school. So I had to explain why things didn't add up for me, and why I did not want to be asked to go through certain sort of, rituals and perform, and participate in certain things, because I just didn't believe in what I was doing. I had to articulate that, and to do it in a way to adults that was, constructive, respectful, or whatever. You're not necessarily going to always have those tools as a 14-year-old, right?
No,
because you're just like, now later, I think the biggest mistake that, I'll just say folks like me, whatever that means, we don't know who folks are that are like me.
Yeah.
Is that when you think you're in the company of people that sort of all think the same way, you can throw off some stray voltage that might be critical of some, and then like, it could be a little harsh.
Yeah.
It could be a little harsh. And then that harsh might mean, especially if somebody feels a bit wounded by it in their presence, then you're sort of like, that was,
Yeah.
it was just clumsy, it was clumsy and not thoughtful to do that. And you understand, then you end up sort of backing up, and it's a good experience to go through, but also sort of teaches you, hey, don't throw stones if you don't have to.
Yeah.
There's more constructive. Now it's funny, anybody who sees or hears this interview and knows me is going to think, what do you mean, Sean, not throwing stones? But I think I've become more sensitive to the things that they're just deeper for people, right?
Yeah.
So, science is like, it's an intellectual contact sport. Okay.
Yes.
We argue with each other all the time. Now, you have to do it in such a way, of course, that you don't destroy personal relationships.
Right.
But you got to have kind of a thick skin, because often our initial, something I interpret in my lab or something like that, if the first impression you may be off, and you don't come out going, I have it figured out. You're like, hey, I'm trying to figure this out. And there's a back and forth and a back and forth and a back and forth. And, it's, when I say a contact sport, well, just like other sport, it's an enjoyable contact sport if you play fair.
Yeah.
And you're, not mean-spirited or a bully or things like that.
Yeah.
So that develops a certain skill sort of and mindset. But if you take that experience as a scientist into certain other settings, and you think others are up for that level,
No.
Yeah, on other topics, you're like, no, wait a second, you're a little, somebody like me might be too intense a debater, too ready to examine everything, sort of figure, in science, everything's fair game.
Right.
It's fair game because it's evidence driven. You got to say, is that consistent? Is that consistent? Is that consistent? Well, you get into, like social issues, you're at a barbecue or something like that.
Right.
Hey, simmer down, buddy. This is, we're just at a barbecue. We're not trying to settle a grand scientific question here.
Right.
So
right.
Sometimes
Absolutely.
you gotta kind of change your mindset. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I was just talking to somebody the other day about that, about how you can be I tell my students all the time when I teach stand-up classes, everybody thinks they want to be roasted until they get roasted, and then it's not so fun anymore. And you can, when you're in like a science environment, or when you're in an intellectual environment or a debate environment, and you are arguing with people and you're asking them to bring up evidence and you're asking them where they got their facts, they're going to come right back at you. But if you do it in a social environment, you might cause people to think about things they've never thought about before. And that can cause trauma. That can cause literal, they can question their entire existence in that moment. And that's a little too much for some people.
That's a little too much. And I think also people can feel judged.
Yes.
And, look, you have that experience as a debater, right? So if you're used to, and you can argue either side of an argument, which is also how law school is taught, right? They can argue either side of an argument. If you're used to that and you just kind of reflexively deploy it, it's worked for you, right? It's worked for you in life this far. It's worked for me in life this far.
Yeah.
But you can deploy it in certain settings, and it does not land well. And so being a bit mindful of that.
Right.
At the same time, if what you're hearing is just absolute garbage,
nonsense,
it's pretty hard to bite your tongue for very long.
Yeah. Or you let out that laugh that you don't mean to let out, and you're like,
exactly.
oh, yeah,
really, yeah.
And one of my favorite sports of all time, and I was just talking about this like 2 nights ago, one of my favorite things to do, maybe it makes me evil, I don't know, is when somebody starts to go off on a rant or a tangent about something that they don't know applies to me, and I don't stop them, and I don't tell them that it applies to me, and I just let them keep going, because I want to see how far they're going to take this, whether it's, I don't know, whether it's about Southerners, because I spent 13 years in Chicago. So especially in like 2016 and 2017, they would just go off on like Southerners and how they're this and how they're that, and how like people from the South are this, and they're all these. And I just love letting them go off without saying a word.
Let them dig that hole.
And then at the very end, revealing that and watching them backpedal as fast as they possibly can. And you're like, no, you said it. I caught you. You said it. I have it. It's right here. So maybe that's evil. I don't know.
A big difference here is that the jury, what we used to call the peanut gallery, usually the peanut gallery was within earshot of your voice.
Right.
Now, of course, with social media, the peanut gallery is infinite.
Yeah.
Peanut gallery is ready to judge. And goodness knows what this has done to discourse.
Right.
On the one hand, you can find more voices out there.
True.
On the other hand, fill in the blank. So I don't have a take on this. I just wonder what having that larger audience, and of course an audience that doesn't necessarily know people personally, and the like dislike button is just not something that I'm really keen about.
Right. Yeah. And have you found that in your pursuit of like genetics and science and biology, have you found that has that hampered or hindered in any way your relationship with people that you met through, say, religion, or that you knew who were religious? Has that changed your relationship with people at all? Or
you mean my experience in biology, has that changed my relationship with religious people?
Like as you began to like pursue sciences more, did you find that people you knew that were religious were like pulling away from you, or did it?
No, I don't think no, I don't think that happened. I don't, for example, if most of the people I knew were Catholic, or as I said, sort of, I'm thinking maybe Lutheran, Episcopalian, this kind of thing. There's just not a big deal there. I didn't know many, for example, I didn't know any Christian fundamentalists that I grew up with. Just wasn't prevalent where I grew up. That would, of course, been a little more awkward, probably, as I came back and visited old friends. In fact, probably the other thing that happened was that, as I was telling you earlier, that I felt I sort of had to fight my way out of Catholicism, because that was the expected default state of where I was going to be. So as a teenager, I had to develop these tools of trying to, extricate myself, but do it in a way that adults would accept. That still leaves a sort of a mark, I think. Probably put a little chip on my shoulder of, hey, why was that so hard? Why would have been nicer to just sort of, kind of leave it blank and let me fill in the blank and see what happens. Instead, I had to kind of actively work my way out. And I think that left me understanding that for a lot of people, that's the default state, that they are brought up, they're expected to join the religion they're brought up in and to embrace that and perhaps pass that on to their kids. So being sensitized by that, not sensitive, not in a positive way, but sensitive by that. I think it took me a while to sort of be able to make peace over things like evolutionary science and things. And actually a really, really influential person is a woman named Jeannie Scott, who led an organization called the National Center for Science Education. And I learned from her that her best allies, she went around the country, especially dealing with opposition against evolution and sometimes joining in court cases and talking to school boards and things like this. Her best allies were clergy.
Interesting.
And because if you stand in front of a school board and you stand in front of a judge and your allies are clergy, and the clergy are saying, oh, wait, the teaching of evolution is straightforward, and religion doesn't belong in public school. So, let's leave that up to us on Saturdays and Sundays. And a judge hears that, it's like, oh, yeah, that's how it goes. Whereas if you just had a bunch of, upset scientists going, but evolution is the right thing, what's a judge to do? So she really taught all of us about the power of alliances, common ground with, for example, clergy. And so, I've sort of sought that. So, when you reached out and said, well, I come on your podcast, I don't, I inferred something from the name of the podcast that perhaps something you had, a journey you had been on out of.
Yeah.
But even if you said, I'm a practicing fundamentalist, Southern Baptist, et cetera, would you talk to me? I would say, oh, heck yes. The best chance we have of kind of making progress is talking to people who don't think alike.
Yes.
Right.
Absolutely.
So sure, we'll have a conversation, and there may be maybe things upon which we disagree, and that's fine.
Yeah.
That's perfectly fine. It's not, this does not determine whether you're a good or a bad person or anything like that.
No.
It's just the way it is.
Yeah. And it's the way that you treat people with those beliefs, because you can be fundamentalist, you can be entirely agnostic or atheist, and in either scenario, if you're an asshole, you're an asshole. And in either scenario,
that's its own
nice,
tribe right there. Yes,
right.
That's right.
Right. Like assholes exist everywhere.
They do. Yeah.
But at the same time, like, especially through this podcast, I have interviewed a lot of people who are still very religious. Some of them were even preachers and pastors. And I have been so surprised by their opinion on certain things. Even now, even this far into my journey, having spoken to so many people, I found that I still had biases that didn't apply to them. And so I feel like there's always that just like I imagine science is a subject that is always changing and always including more and excluding more, and maybe one day you think one thing and the next day you read a study that proves another thing. I feel like us as people are the same way. We will always, if we seek it, we will always continue to learn more and grow by talking to people who are different than us. And you might find that people who are different than you actually aren't that much different than you at all, but maybe in the ways that matter.
Yeah, and I think you can make the pact to agree to disagree on certain things.
Yeah.
Identify probably why you got there, and for goodness sake, and especially these days, find some things to agree upon. I'll pick something between, I think, science and communities of faith that I think they could find a lot of common ground on, and that's really the future of life on the planet. You can come at it from a scientific point of view. You could sit there and say, well, gosh, we've lost 2/3 of the wildlife on this planet in numbers in just the last 50 years.
Mm-hmm.
The world is getting diminished, right? There's less variety and beauty out there than there used to be. And I think if you come at it from a religious perspective, as many religious leaders and writers and speakers have, is to say, well, wait a second, we're failing in sort of the meaning of our time on Earth, which is, we can't leave an impoverished planet to the next generation. This is not, it's not morally right. It's not ethically right. It's, if you take it in the sense of this is the world, that's the act of a creator, we are destroying the creator's work, So even you might not quite have the same reasons, you can at least agree on the common cause that this is concern to humanity, that we need community leaders, we need people who, like faith leaders, who are trusted messengers to their communities. We need scientists who might have constructive ideas about how we can restore some of what's been lost. And we join and we make common cause. Those groups making common cause might not agree on other social issues.
Right.
So what? That's just going to be a fact of life all the time. I'm a Red Sox fan. You might be a White Sox or a Cubs fan. Who knows? We're not going to agree on certain things.
Right.
But these important things that we can find common cause, let's join forces for the common good. And it's just really disappointing. There's just so little narrative or evidence of that out there, and certainly in our political systems and sort of on the airwaves. But I think it's something that people in their hearts, they really, really are thirsty for right now.
Right. And even if you think of the most fundamentalist, like I hate to use the term crazy, but like what people might label like craziest faith-based people you've ever thought of, even they, the ones who like picket funerals and things like that, even they preach what they preach because they insist that if you do the bad things, it will end life on Earth or it will destroy. So even the ones that are so far out that people of the same religion are like, we don't associate with them, even they agree that it is a bad thing that we don't continue to have like life and existence for the generations beyond us. And I think that's really interesting. Very interesting.
So I think that this is I think I don't know. I can't criticize political leaders because I don't know what that life is like. It seems like a miserable.
You could not pay me enough.
A miserable road to hoe. But we just don't seem to have much flavor of that in our national discourse right now. What can we agree upon? How can we act on these sorts of priorities? And you can just come at it from all sorts of ways. There's a book called The Good Ancestor, just a book I read in the last few months. And I thought it's a nice way to reframe it, asking the question, are we being good ancestors? That the 7 or 8 billion people are alive today, we're going to be followed by tens and tens and tens of billions of people who are going to inherit the world that we have shaped kind of disproportionately, right? Are we being good ancestors to much larger numbers of people that will follow us in the way that we're taking care of the planet? And that just, I think you ask that question in any audience, right? It doesn't matter what political stripe, religious stripe, what your training is or anything like that. That's a good moral human question to ask.
That is.
Are we being good ancestors? And if the answer is, well, maybe not, then you might ask, well, what would make us better ancestors to future generations? And, what's that take? And there's, of course, not going to be easy answers to that. Or easy answers, we already would have done it.
Yeah.
So I think sometimes we just need a new narrative, a new, kind of a new mindset to join forces on.
Yeah, that's a really good way to put it. Are we being good ancestors? I think the answer is no for a lot of people. And I think they wouldn't realize that until they thought about that.
I think there's very strong evidence that at the same time, I don't think we should, we also have to make sure we don't beat ourselves up so much,
right,
or to paralyze ourselves, or that we speak so much in terms of gloom and doom,
right,
that people give up, that it's hopeless and pessimistic, et cetera. Because I actually would say it's not the case that it's hopeless. I have plenty of evidence that it's time to change the road we're on, but the sooner the better.
Yeah, you can always start today. Today is always a good time to start. Yeah. I read something the other day where this person tweeted, I don't know who needs to know this, but you don't have to start something at 05 or 10 or 15. You can start at 13 or 11. You can start anytime you want, no matter what the task is. And I feel like today is the perfect day to start that. 2 last questions for you.
Sure.
First, where can we find your work? And 2, when are you going to start stand-up? When are you going to start comedy?
What am I? No, I'm just going to be a fan of, maybe I should take the second one first. The second one first, so I'm a huge fan of stand-up.
Yeah.
So the question is, where am I going to see you doing stand-up? And I'll come and introduce myself.
There you go. There you go.
Right.
Get
So
some stage time.
I'll keep it. Well, I don't want any stage time. I'll introduce you
bummer.
on the side. I'll catch it between sets.
Yeah.
I'm just a big fan of stand-up, and actually, I go here in DC. I have kids that live in LA, and I'm in the habit of going both here and there, and of course watching stuff on TV. I guess again, because also you get a whole variety of perspectives coming out there, and you get different kinds of jokes. I love people who can write rapid one-liners. I'll take somebody like a Jim Gaffigan, but I also love storytellers that unpack a long story with a few punches. So big fan of stand-up. Okay, now we'll come around the other way. You said, where can you read my work? So I've written several books for the general public. So if you just look up Sean, so I have a personal website, Sean B. Carroll, which will lead you to those books, or you can look it up on Amazon or whatever. So the most recent book is called A Series of Fortunate Events, and that's the role of chance in sort of the awe-inspiring sense of just how unlikely it is that we're even here, or that you and I are even having this conversation. And before that, I wrote a book called The Serengeti Rules, and that was very much about the science behind how we can sort of restore wildernesses and species, inspired by one of the great wildernesses in the world in Africa. And if you dig back, you can find some earlier books. There's a book I wrote called Remarkable Creatures, which is about really some of the pioneers of evolutionary science and the great adventures and voyages they went on to sort of discover the stuff that made us think how the world was put together. So all that is sort of driven by story. As a scientist trying to communicate, I'm really driven by story. Now that I just told you about the writing, you wouldn't know this part, but you can also find it on my personal website. I lead a science documentary studio as part of my work here. So we make films for the public that air on CNN and PBS, and one coming to HBO soon. And these are stories generally about science and nature. And this is just another way to communicate. Big collaborative process, work with filmmakers all over the globe to bring important and yes, deliberately chosen hopeful stories about how can we make this a better world. So, or sometimes they're just stories of great adventures and exploration. So we did a movie, for example, called The Farthest, which is about the Voyager missions to the outer solar system, and that was a blast. So films and books are the works that I'm going to leave behind.
Perfect. Awesome. That's what's going to make you a better ancestor every time. Every time you publish something, every time you write something, every time you direct something, you'll be one step to being a better ancestor.
Yeah, hopefully these are things that will stick around for a while and that people will find, worthwhile, worth digging into, and get something out of it that enriches their lives.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for talking to me and answering my questions and giving me your opinions. And I really appreciate you being here. And if I'm ever in your area, I will send you some tickets free of charge.
Pleasure, Sydney. Thanks so much.
Have a good day.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.